You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cantina Cast. This is the Waystation, your source for Star Wars news and rumors, the week of May 7th, 2023. And as always, I'm joined by Jonesy. Jonesy's somewhere on a satellite far off in the
Spaceship
galaxy.
Earth, yes.
Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, man. It feels like forever since it's only been like a week since we did the show, but it just feels like forever because we've been all over the place. And May the 4th, it was so much fun, and can't wait to talk a little about that and share the news for the week.
Yeah, we've got a lot of news actually to get to, so probably won't get to it all, but if we can't, we may table this stuff for later, or there's actually something I'm really excited about talking about, but we may have to just table that for Thursday when we get to the collectibles, the Tatooine trade show. What did we call that thing? Tatooine
Trading Post.
Trading Post, that's the one. All right. Hey, before we get started, why don't we give some shout outs to some folks here.
Yeah, in the live stream, if you're listening to this for the first time, we do a live stream on Thursdays and Sundays. Jonathan, Steph, Music Train, Lauren, Alex, Sky, and Dale, and of course our esteemed Patreon members who, I don't know, they pay the bills. Albert, I don't know if you heard about this, but they pay the bills, and so welcome to Reader Reborn. Actually, he's just joined he leveled up to the now part of the tribe tier as well. So thanks to him. I can't remember if y'all shouted him out already, but we'll do it again anyway. And of course, our now part of the tribe members, Mike, Lauren, Dante, Risk, Justin, Jackson, Sharkman, Dan, Daz, Isabella, Uncle Leon, Josh, Jacob, Steve, and now Reader Reborn. And then Delusions Grandeur, of course, CJ and Rod. Thank you all so much. And Albert, I have to say thank you to you too, because I was watching you and Lauren the other day, and I was actually watching the live stream, and you actually did Sharkman, Dan, in a reasonable proximity that was semi-acceptable.
Yeah, right. Well, it just wouldn't be the same show had I done it any differently. So you're welcome, and you're welcome, Sharkman Dan, because that's just the way we roll here now.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, and sorry for we had a little bit of an audio blip there at the beginning, so hopefully we have fixed that.
Levels are leveling, hopefully, at this point.
Right.
Okay, well, let's get into our news segment. And first off, just a quick shout out to everybody at Silver Lake Creative who allowed us to be part of the May the 4th Be With You All 2023. We mentioned this. We had the poll going on out there for a number of days. We got a chance to be there on May 4th, which was an absolute blast. There were so many incredible people there dressed up in costumes, doing shows, vendors selling things. We posted some video of this. Well, we posted some pictures of it. We don't have any video, unfortunately. I am working on the audio for the show that we did. So this was your top 9 favorite Star Wars saga films. We posted the results on Patreon. So if you've got a chance to, if you're a Patreon member, you can go out there and take a look at those. We'll release the audio sometimes this week, and we'll maybe even talk about it a little bit more on a later show here. But nonetheless, the audio may be a little bit, it's kind of sketchy right now. Let's just leave it at that, because we were in a big room, tons of people. There was a lot of other background noises and stuff like that. So I'm trying to clean this up as best I can, but it very likely will be a Patreon exclusive type show. So, but anyways, the point of this was really to say thank you to everybody that came out on May the 4th. We met some really great people, introduced ourselves, expanded our audience to a number of folks here locally in and around the Austin area. So I had a really good time. Jonesy, what did you think?
Oh, it was fantastic. I mean, and Steph, Johnny, Keith, the whole crew over there, the guys that were running the soundstage. When you do live events, like weird things happen, surprises happen. We had the threat of weather, so we had to move everything indoors. So everything was already kind of chaotic and confusing. So that went off without a hitch, that everyone enjoyed themselves. It was on the local news, I believe, as well.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, so it's really great. Like it all comes together and people have a great time. That's all that matters. And so we're hoping to get some better audio here. We'll figure that part of it out. But over on Patreon, it is fun though to watch. We're having some of the conversation over in Patreon, which is, I got to be honest, kind of a new thing for us. We'll post things, but we don't really have a whole lot of comments. But the last few weeks, since we've made some of the changes, it's exciting to be able to see some of that changing. And so being able to go back and forth, talk about what their favorites were, what their surprises were, where this should have been or where that would have been. we'd love to have more comments over there about some of that too. And who knows? I keep telling Albert, I was like, hey, if we can't get the audio figured out, we'll just redo the show for y'all. How about that?
That's an option as well.
So if you want that, let us know on Patreon.
Yeah.
CantinaCast.com/Patreon.
And we can like make fun of, I mean, it was everybody that voted for it. So a lot of folks that were part of that. So there's really nothing, risk here for anyone. So
right.
It should be fun. Okay. Beyond that though. So you mentioned the very first thing here is kind of a more in the collectibles area, but wow, I didn't know about this. And I'm like just in awe and like jealous as all heck get out right now.
Right. So this one, we got this up on the screen. So there was a post out there from the animation director over at ILM. His name is Hal Hickel. And he posted this picture of looks like the front of a Lego box for a Lucas Yoda fountain. So this is basically the statue that's in front of Lucasfilm in California of Yoda up on the fountain. And it's really beautiful and everything, because they've done statues for this as well. Mm-hmm. But they basically made a Lego version of it. Now, there's people asking whether or not this is real or not. And supposedly, according to him, and he's kind of being a bit, I don't know, he's kind of a bit of a smart aleck about it, but it sounds like it is real. And maybe it was given to Lucasfilm or ILM employees or something like that as a Star Wars Day gift for May the 4th. And so that's kind of cool. But when you look at this picture here, it looks kind of like this was just done up by really anybody. The resolution's a bit on the lower side. The fonts, I know we do this a lot, so we can be really nitpicky because we see all the little quirky things, but it doesn't seem legit. But he says, rest assured that this is 100% true. Now, this is not being mass marketed that we believe or anything like that, but it was just really cool to be able to see that. And if they did give this out to folks for Star Wars Day, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And so some people were getting excited. Well, maybe this is a Yoda. This is a new model for Yoda. No, this is the same one that was part of the Dagobah training pack, just so no one's thinking they're missing out on a new Yoda model or paint job or something like that. This is one that was already released earlier this year. Yeah,
my thoughts are if anything, it's probably real. They probably handed it out in a little bag or something. I doubt they went to production and mass produced this thing. They could have easily assembled it, put it on a white background, took a picture, added all the junk in there. Someone should just look up 6471930 and see if it checks out as a legit number for Lego. But either way, I mean, I don't know if they would have like mocked this whole thing up.
They usually don't go that long of a number. Usually it's like a 5-digit number if they're real, but again,
maybe that's a phone number, and if you add in the area code for where Lucasfilm's at, you get a secret message that tells you how to order one of these.
This is a new show. This is a new show, not speculation, Albert. Come on.
Oh, sorry. It's always speculation for me, but
that's true.
Either way, it's cool. Like even if someone just created this and photoshopped it, this is a really cool Lego set that I'd pay to have. So.
Yeah, the cool thing about this is really anybody could build this. I mean, none of these are special parts or anything like that. So if you have the pieces, you can go ahead and build this yourself.
Like Steph's with me. She says tinfoil hat time. Let's do it. Get it on. Get it started.
All right.
All right.
So May 4th, fun one. Yeah, May the 4th. Yeah, go for it.
Well, I was going to say May 4th was, and we didn't really get a chance to talk about this in the last show that we did, but Carrie Fisher was officially honored on the Hollywood Walk of Fame with her star, and there is a video out there. Variety was kind of the big sponsor behind it all. It runs about 30 minutes long. It's kind of crazy to believe or think that she died 6 years ago. Like when I heard that as part of the speech, I thought it was actually 6.5 years ago is what they mentioned. I thought, wow, that's right, because it was December in the month that she passed away. But it was hosted by Ellen Kay of iHeartRadio. I don't listen to iHeartRadio, so I don't know who she is. But her number officially is number 2754. And not only did they give her the star, but they actually, in Hollywood, California, May 4th is now officially Carrie Fisher Day. So on top of all that, she got her own day by the little town there, little city of Hollywood, California. And in attendance were Mark Hamill, Billy Lord. They had R2-D2 and C-3PO. I don't think I heard either one of them speak in the video that's there. But they were there. They had a stormtrooper that just kind of stood out in the background the entire time. But I'll kind of get your thoughts. But two things that really stood out for me when I watched this. Mark Hamill first came on, and he kind of did his little speech. He actually read from the piece that he did when Carrie passed away 6.5 years ago. He reread that, and it's still relevant. It still hits and cuts really deep in terms of the things he says. And I'll leave it up to you guys to go out there and look for that video or look for what he wrote, because it's really deep and kind of emotional. But on top of all that, he started off by saying today, May the 4th be Carrie Frances Fisher's Day, which it essentially was. he called her charming, funny, adorable, wise beyond her years, brutally frank, brutally honest, and there's a number of stories of that, right? But the one thing that kind of got to me was it was a great moment when Billie Lourd finally came up and she wrote all her stuff down, of course, on paper, and she started off by saying, "My mom used to say you weren't actually famous until you became a Pez dispenser,"
Right.
which I mean, it's just, and it got the crowd going. It was a really special moment to have her up there. By the way, her dress looked phenomenal. Like it was a Carrie Fisher, Princess Leia standing in front of the map room from Star Wars, right? That scene where she's just kind of saying, I think it was one of the publicity shots they did. I don't think it was a shot from the movie, but her entire dress, like it was kind of like a skirt, I guess. It really wasn't a dress because she had like a top on. But that dress or that skirt was like full print. It looked phenomenal. So anyways, I just want to get your thoughts on it as well. But yeah, it was just a great 30-minute video. Go check it out if you haven't had a chance to watch it.
It was really great. I mean, even posthumously to be able to get this is a huge honor. And I think for Mark Hamill and Billie Lourd to be there, I mean, yeah, I love that she started off with this Pez joke because this is something we've seen in her forever, right? This has been kind of out in the world for a long time, but it just epitomizes who Carrie Fisher was and who she is to a lot of people, even still to this day, right? Just this really frank, open, just everything is really clear for her and on display.
Transparent.
And, yeah, very transparent in every different way, right? And again, not just Star Wars, but she was a huge advocate and very transparent about her struggles with drug addiction and with a variety of other things throughout life and the challenges that came with being part of a very famous family, as well as having a very famous franchise that's built around you and then going back to it and things like that. So it's really heartwarming to be able to see that and hear those stories come up, and that's a part of her legacy as much as Star Wars is, and that we celebrate that part of it, even though it ended up maybe taking her a little bit too earlier than we would have preferred. That is part of her lasting legacy as well. So not just what she did in film, but also who she was as a person.
Yeah, and both of those speeches, honestly, Mark Hamill's was just so amazing, but then Billie Lourd did an incredible job with her speech, and it was just personal.
So personal, yeah.
Yeah, it was really, really good. So do yourself a favor, go out there, watch the video, just type in Carrie Fisher, Walk of Fame. It's on Variety's YouTube channel if you want to watch it there as well. So good stuff. Congratulations to Carrie Fisher and her family and legacy, because well deserving. Lauren just mentioned, I'm surprised she didn't already have one. Yeah, that was kind of surprising too. But there's so many stars out there, and it seems like I don't know if there's any real rhyme or reason as to when an actor or actress gets a star. It's just we're glad that she does have one now, and the fact that she has her own holiday there in Hollywood, California. So
like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a lot of these things just don't make any kind of sense.
Yeah, right. There's some bands that have been waiting forever they're
like just have no idea how they're not in there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, anyway.
All right, well, let's move on from that and let's talk about Return of the Jedi, the box office stuff. So did you get any numbers on this?
Yeah, so it did a little over 7 million for the weekend from April 28th to May 4th, which is actually good for a top 5 finish. And for comparison, like it was in the number 4 slot. Number 5 was John Wick 4. So when you think about a 40-year-old movie, still kind of pulling in a decent number, very limited run. So if you think about this too.
That's the thing. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just to put it in perspective. So a normal release these days, if you look at what Guardians of the Galaxy did, it released to, usually it's between like 3,800 and 4,500 theaters. That's a mass release.
Right.
Return of the Jedi released to 475.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to, when you put that in perspective, and it was still a top 5 finisher, and granted, it wasn't a super strong movie, you didn't have a lot to choose from, but you still have things like Super Mario Brothers that are out there. You had Guardians of the Galaxy coming out that weekend. John Wick is still out there and doing really well. You have good movies out there, but for that to come through and do strong with less than 500 theaters, and it didn't change. It was 475, and that was it.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive to me.
I think so too. We're going to talk a little bit more about this a little bit later on our Patreon Spotlight show here at the top of the hour. We're going to actually talk about Return of the Jedi, reminiscent about the 40th anniversary, our first experience, but then we can talk about some of the box office numbers as well too. But yeah, when you look at it as a per theater, right? If you take that total amount divided by the total number of theaters, I don't know what the math is, but I'm sure it's got to be pretty high. If it only released to 475 theaters and it still came in number 4 for the week. And granted, we all get it was on a limited run, so that we got to put some things in perspective. We knew it wasn't going to be out there for the next month or so. It really was kind of a week. So it was a compressed timeline. A lot of people did go out. I think the point here is these movies still do really well, and it behooves Disney to re-release them in theaters. And one of the main things I want to talk about later on that Spotlight show is just the experience of these movies. As many times as we've already seen them, going back in and seeing them on the big screen with all the big audio and the big visuals, it's just a different experience. It hits differently than sitting there watching them, even on your home, setup, or certainly on your phone, right? Very, very different. So yeah, so that's still gonna sell tickets.
Well, to your point, that's about $15,000 per theater in that kind of run. For comparison, I believe, if I remember what some of the Guardians numbers were doing, it was about $28,000 per theater. Mm-hmm. Again, on a massive first release weekend,
right?
And on a major release. So not apples to apples, but again, just comparatively, pretty impressive haul per theater for those that were able to carry it.
Yeah.
And yeah, looking forward to talking this about more in detail with you later. So for you Patreon members, make sure you go check out cantinacast.com Patreon. Go look for the link there if you're in the right tier.
Yep. Go see Guardians 2 or 3, by the way. I've seen it twice already, and
I've heard it's really good.
Freaking phenomenal. All I'm going to say is no sleep till Brooklyn.
Oh, Lord.
That's all. All right.
Little Beastie Boys.
It's one of the best scenes ever. That's all I got to say. So
in more interesting news and developing news seeming on the day, we have the Writers Guild strike, so the WGA, right? So what are the actual impacts here to Star Wars, Albert?
Well, I think it's so a couple of the other sites I follow as well were talking about this even before, and I think I mentioned this to you.
Yeah.
So Star Wars was trying to position Star Wars. Lucasfilm and Disney were trying to position themselves. Everybody knew the writer's strike was coming. This didn't just happen overnight. It was
these develop over. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, the writing was on the wall as early as like 90 days ago, maybe even longer, depending on who you spoke to and who was in the know at the time. So it's funny because there are some rumors out there, and I don't have the specifics. I don't really want to get into them too much right now, but a lot of what we saw with Damon Lindelof, right, and how he was kind of booted out, some of that may have been impacted by the Writers Guild. They were trying to position themselves so that they could get somebody in and kind of know where this was going to go and not be impacted from the movie perspective. I also had heard that they had, some of the contracts that they had written up, like in England, right, for Acolyte specifically. I think that's one of the ones that we're probably most concerned about. Right. There technically isn't going to be any impact in there because of the way their labor laws work, and a lot of the writers are over there. So as right now, here's what I would say. It doesn't look like it's going to be much of an impact of anything today. Now, all this changes depending on how long the writer's strike goes, right? We saw this, when was it we had the last one, where it went on for like weeks and weeks, and suddenly shows were getting canceled, shows were getting postponed. I mean, it can have really strong impacts as time weighs on. But I think right now, at least in the short term, I think they were kind of, if you will, boarding up the house and doing the best they could to kind of weather the storm. But it all really depends on how long this is going to go. This can very well impact Star Wars in the long run here.
Yeah, and there are a lot of weird rules with all this stuff. And when you go read some of the contracts, even the UK contracts, they are really difficult to translate because it's a lot of suggestions. Like, so this is unions, right? And the idea of being a scab or crossing the line and doing things you're not supposed to, even if you don't work for the WGA, you can't necessarily work with someone with the WGA in some capacities. And then you have pressures from Disney and everybody else that are trying to do this. But generally speaking, what it means is, for just kind of for those maybe not familiar with how this stuff works, and this is going to be super high level, it's not going to be totally accurate, but basically any material that you have already written going into, like before the strike, is fine to use. There's no rules against that. What they limit people to being able to do or prevent is any new active writing going into any kind of content while the strike is going on. Mm-hmm. So that's the part to remember. So what this does do for shows that are in production, this makes rewrites and reshoots really challenging on some levels, because you have to kind of work around some of this stuff, because pretty much everybody in the U.S., so the WGA is a U.S. guild, right? I believe it stands for Writers Guild of America, right?
Yes.
So it's a U.S. only thing. But even if you're in another country, they have these kind of soft agreements that also say that, we won't impede on another union, and they won't step on each other's toes, and they'll try to respect each other's organizations so they don't undermine one another, they don't lose business, and they don't steal business, right? And so that's part of what is also going on too, is even if you're in the UK, there's really a lot of those little extra laws in there, those extra rules that are more suggestions and recommendations. They're not necessarily hard and fast, but they do tend to be adhered to. But to your point, what's most important though is how long does it go on for? For the content that we're like worried about right now, Acolyte seems to be the one that's the most concerning, just because we knew that was in active development. We knew they were in shooting. We knew they were running a little behind where we had originally reported where they were in April. So we don't really know the status of that. We know that Andor, the writing had already finished up, so that wasn't as much of a concern in that space. But when they come actually around to start doing shoots and getting, in there, how long does this go on, and when does that actually, become an issue for, the rest of this content that's going on? Now, the other interesting part of this is that Disney supposedly, and I haven't seen any evidence of this, but supposedly has sent letters out to their folks saying, hey, even if you were part of WGA, if you have other responsibilities like producer, executive producer, all those things, you're still expected to work on those types of that type of work, right? And this isn't just a Disney thing. Every company with a union does stuff like this, because they want to maintain productivity during times of strike. And so folks like Tony Gilroy are also producers on the show, right? So they have other things that they can work on, and they won't halt production altogether. But there are just certain pieces that they're unable to work on.
Yeah. So it is complex. I would say that. Like I try not to get too caught up in this stuff. I mean, we'll continue to report on it, obviously, as things kind of happen, and when we get more concrete, definitive type, headlines about the Writers Guild strike, whether it's ending, where it's happening with it, again, if it's going to impact, we'll continue to bring that to you guys. But I'm no expert on it. We probably should get Maggie in here. She's been going on about this stuff. She knows all the ins and outs of it. She's been on the show before. Right. So, but yeah, I think right now, let's just kind of all wait and see. Again, it just really depends on how long this thing goes before it actually has an impact.
Yeah, it is it's far reaching for Star Wars, though. Charles Soule's, impacted by this. All of the Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau, I mean, they're all part of WGA. So from a potential impact, it's high. We'll just see what the reality of that looks like with how long this thing goes on for.
Yep. Okay, well, let's talk now about, speaking of movies, we've got some Star Wars movie news. And this was so over the past week here, I can't remember if this was part of May 4th or not, but there was some articles in here. Empire had did an interview with both Kathleen Kennedy and Dave Filoni. And I guess what was the gist of both of those because it was very similar in terms of the message that both of them were talking about here.
Yeah, and I think at least the Kathleen Kennedy one was also a holdover from Celebration. I'm sorry, the Filoni interview was also a little bit from Celebration. So it's difficult to figure out if these are new or just kind of coupled together. But yeah, Kathleen Kennedy was really interesting. She compared this to James Bond, or compared Star Wars to James Bond, and what they were wanting to do. They were wanting to have feel like Star Wars feel more like an event again, which I think you've heard a lot of the fandom say very similar things. We want Star Wars to feel special. We want it to feel every 3 years we get a movie, we get real excited. We have a lot of time to lead up to it. And she's calling on some of those notes, right? And so part of the quote here, she says, I've often brought up Bond. That's every 3 or 4 years. And there wasn't this pressure to feel like you had to have a movie every year. I feel like that was very important to Star Wars. We have to eventize this. It's much better to tell the truth that we're going to make these movies and they're going to be made and release them when they're ready to be released. So some of that's very consistent with what she's been saying, right? We're going to release movies when they make sense, the right stories at the right time and the right amount of lead time, to kind of put it in a nutshell, but also make them feel special. So some of this also lends to some of the conversations we've had, though, of is an every year thing for the next 3 or 4 years, or even 3 out of the next 4 years, line up with that kind of comment with New Jedi Order, with Dawn of the Jedi, with New Republic, those types of stories. And it seems like, no, it's a little inconsistent with at least what the fandom is kind of bringing out there, because Lucasfilm's not announced any kind of dates, of course. But, with that type of approach, I think it is one of being more measured, though, which I think we are all okay with, even though we're a little anxious for no movies at this point. But at the same time, they are going to get them right, is the overall intent.
Well, and I think this is, so again, to be fair, Disney did this to themselves, right? They came out and said, oh, we're going to do a movie every 2 years. And I think you and I both said, hey, that's fine. If anybody can pull this off, it's Disney, right? I had every bit of confidence in this. And, we talked about how they've got multiple production companies, studios, writers, directors, infinite amounts of cash if they really want to do this. So, again, if there was any one group that could do it, it's somebody like Disney. They are big enough to probably do this. To then come back and say, well, we're going to do we want these to feel, like events. I mean, I think that's eating crow. I think they're and she said as much as well. I mean, she's already come out, it was 2 months ago, and said, hey, yeah, what we set out to do really wasn't the best approach. She kind of walked that back a little bit. So I get it. I mean, it makes sense now that they are kind of going down this formula. It's very easy for the people that hate Disney and for Lucasfilm to jump on this and say, we told you so. We told you this was going to be dad. We told you. And that's they have every right to do it now, right? But if it makes them feel any better, at least they're taking the approach of, we do want these to feel special. We don't want there to be pressure. We don't want to work under duress to hit timelines. Sometimes I feel like Marvel is in there that, right? They go and announce all these deadlines, these schedules, and there's a lot of runway there. So I'm not saying anything about that, but it doesn't take much for these things to suddenly get behind schedule, and suddenly they're cramming and working crazy hours, and then there's reshoots and rewrites, and they're all kind of stick to this date, and the next thing you know, they just move the goalpost over, right? They say, oh, we're going to have to push that movie 6 months out or whatever. And then on the Marvel side, I know there are a lot of people that get really upset at that because those those posts constantly keep moving because they keep putting these stakes in the ground. But you have to understand, it is a business, right? They do want they want investors to know that, hey, we've got product coming. There's stuff that's coming down the pipeline, and this is why you should invest, why you should buy stock, right? So it's all part of a system. I mean, it's not like somebody's just kind of shooting from the hip on this stuff. There's actually a method to the madness. You may not agree with it, you may not like it, but that's the reality, and it's always been the reality. So, I like this formula better. I'd like to think that Star Wars comes out when it comes out, and if it makes sense to have big events, which we'll talk about kind of Dave Filoni's here in just a little bit. We want it to feel like an event. We want it to hit the big boulders. We want these to be these really significant things that happened in Star Wars that kind of, these watershed moments, as I like to call them, where things really split off and we go back and go, wow, remember that time when this happened? Now look at, the trail this left, the storylines and the other spin-offs and things that happen, right? We want that stuff to kind of be there. So I think this all makes sense, and I would agree with, I guess, the approach at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a great segue into Dave Filoni's comments. I mean, he in Empire as well, and we'll have links to all this in the show notes, and this was at Celebration, he basically said that, you want these movies to be moments, in his words, quote, moments that define an era. Right. And I think when he's saying this, the article was trying to spin the title a little bit more of this is how his movie is and what he's trying to do. I think in general, he was just describing Star Wars and the expectations that we all have going into a Star Wars movie. Right. And so the full quote for him was, to me, a theatrical experience has to have a big idea, a monumental moment in the time period that changes what's happening. And he went on to talk about, when you have Empire Strikes Back, you have Return of the Jedi, you have a major event that happens because those are your major story beats. I think you mentioned this just a couple weeks ago. These are your major story beats that you have to be able to articulate, right? Because that's that tells you what's going on with your audience. It tells you what's at stake, what are the challenges, and then how are we going to get over that challenge and resolve it. Right. And then how's it play into the next thing that you want to do? And that story does the same type of thing, right? And you kind of go through that process. And so that's what he's really talking about here. He's saying that when we do this, we've got to live up to these grand expectations. It has to feel special. It can't feel like we're just... I was reading a comment about New Jedi Order the other day, and it was about like how amazing it was. I was like, and I've said this publicly so many times, there was so much fluff in the New Jedi Order book series, right? There was so much fluff. They could have trimmed a third or more of those books out. And I equate that to what Dave Filoni is saying. Like, we can't give you fluff. We have to say, okay, we've built up to this event. It has to pay off. And Avengers is probably a good example of that, right? All of these things fit together and they come together finally. And then you have this one moment that really does feel like it's big and grand and there's a lot at stake. Knowing that the challenge you have is that you have another movie that came out before you that's set in front of you with Force Awakens.
Right.
But thankfully, they have a lot of runway in between those things. So they've picked a nice thing here. And this is why the movie with Rey, the New Jedi Order movie later on, is important to have, 15 years in between there, because that gives you that runway, that leeway to have flexibility with their stories. But anyway, your thoughts on Dave Filoni's kind of approach to this?
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, I'm looking forward to that. I'd love to see the fact that we have these kind of big moments. I mean, just thinking in my head, Phantom Menace, what was the big moment? It was probably a couple. And there's a couple in every movie, right? Qui-Gon Jinn dying was probably significant because that's what started Obi-Wan Kenobi down the path of training Anakin Skywalker. We get to Clone Wars. Well, it's the birth of the clones, and what did that do? That's a pretty significant moment. The birth of Darth Vader in Revenge of the Sith. With Star Wars, it's Luke Skywalker and the destruction of the Death Star. It's Luke becoming or knowing that his father is Darth Vader in Episode 7 and Episode 8, right? You go on and on. There's these big watershed moments, these huge monumental things that happen, and I would expect that to be the case for all movies. I was just thinking in The Force Awakens, though, like, was there anything in The Force Awakens? Like, was it just Hosni and Prime blowing up? Or I guess it's the death of Han Solo?
Death of Han Solo, the Starkiller base. Again, the resurrection, like the rebirth of the rebellion. I know we say that really happened later on, at least the movie tells you happened later on. But it was also the reintroduction of Star Wars, I think, too, right?
Yeah, that's why I was trying to give it a fair, I wasn't trying to give it a pass, but I'm thinking, okay, I get it. They probably had a little bit, and so the point of that.
Introduction to the First Order, I think, was a big
that's probably significant. Right? For sure. But, so yeah, I would want them to do that and then save the other stuff for the television events, and not to knock the television, but that's in the rest of the context of the quote, that's kind of what he's talking about. They're building up all of the characters and all the other quote fluff stuff, right? And I know that's a really loaded word because people complain all the time about how there's so much fluff in here, but the stuff that he's talking about that they don't want to put in front on the big screen is happening at the Disney Plus level. It's happening in television shows and animated shows, right? He wants to save the big, bolder events to happen in the movies, and I think that's what we would come to expect. So it's good to see that this is what they're talking about. These are the things they're thinking about. Feels like this movie's going to be in good hands, and I can't wait to see Heir to the Empire.
Yeah. If anything, it puts more pressures on the TV shows because those are the ones that still have to deliver great moments and feel like they're still valuable to have in the rotation, right?
And speaking of Star Wars television, we got a couple things here. Just quickly, if you haven't had a chance, go see the Young Jedi Adventures. I finally watched the whole series. They're actually really, really good. If you watch Spidey and His Amazing Friends, which is a kind of a preschooler Disney Plus kind of show as well, it's the same animation. I think I mentioned this last week, but they're so good. They're really, really good. I can't believe how well they did it. And the kids are using the Force, which is the cool thing about it, because it's set in the High Republic. They're all Force sensitive, and they're all running around using Force powers, which is just, again, something that really kind of pulls at my heartstrings. So happy to see that.
One thing that Disney has always really done well has been kind of junior content, and this fits the bill like through and through. So yeah, it's definitely fun to go enjoy it with your younger kids, but also if you just want something fun to pass the time, it's great stuff.
Right.
All right, let's talk about a little more adult style. How about that? Let's talk a little about maybe Ahsoka and some Timothy Zahn. Well, all right, get your mind out of the gutter.
That kind of stuff. Well, I didn't know where you were going with this. Is this in the show notes somewhere?
Right, no, yeah. So one quick rumor, and then we'll get into more of a Tim Zahn interview that he had recently, but there's a rumor going around that maybe Timothy Zahn is writing a companion book, some sort of material that'll kind of tie in with the Ahsoka series. Do you hear anything like this? Do you have any, even if you haven't, any credibility, you think? Were we too far into this where we'd have already heard about a book from Timothy Zahn by now?
No, it wouldn't surprise me if we had not heard a book from Timothy Zahn. He's been pretty quiet. He's had a lot of time. So they could have, I know he, at one point, during Rebels, they had tapped him on the shoulder. He was kind of consulting on the character from that perspective as well. And I think they still hold him in high regards. I mean, he is the brain of Thrawn, right? So I think, and so to your question about whether there are other rumors, yes, these rumors are going around. What's not clear to me, and I was trying to do some research on this before we got on the air, it's not clear to me, like, if this is, so a lot of times, and I promise I won't keep rehashing this every time, but sometimes there's a rumor that comes out and then it gets picked up by 4 or 5 different people that are kind of more the credible folks that kind of manage rumors.
And the beast just gets fed at that point.
Yeah, it keeps getting circulated. And so it's hard for me to tell on this one. Like, I can't tell if it was one rumor that started or if this is coming from multiple sources. It feels like it's one rumor. So I don't want to give too much credit to this, but I mean, at the same time, he's come out publicly and talked about how there are things that happened during that time frame, and he's got it in his head. He's not confirming anything. He's not saying that Disney's kind of said, hey, come out and tell us that story. But in his mind, he's already thinking through that whole process of like, so let's say if I put Ezra and Thrawn out there, what would be happening, right? And giving whatever limited knowledge Filoni has passed on with all of that. But, I mean, in his head, he's got it. And I'm sure Filoni in his head has got a storyline as well. So maybe they merge those two stories, or Filoni consults him, and they kind of come together and collaborate on this, which I think would be freaking amazing. But I think if you're gonna put the writing in the hands of any one person to tell the story where Thrawn is going to be a primary character, it's got to be Timothy Zahn. So I think there's a lot of credibility to the fact that if nothing else, it would probably be him more than any other writer that would be tapped to tell that particular story.
All right. I think when we look at direct tie-ins, the answer is no, as far as like 2023. I think we would have already heard about it at Celebration or sometime since. We're pretty far down this path to not have any kind of story there. Now, he did have an interview, a video interview with Le Tribune de Coruscant, which is, I believe, a French-speaking podcast.
Your French is very, good there, man.
Le Tribune de Coruscant. That's probably terrible. I apologize to everybody that's French-speaking out there. That was awful. But anyway, it was a good interview because there were a few tidbits there, and this is one of them that had a tie into that. And basically, he's really interested in exploring the last 9 years between Thrawn and Ezra. And let that sink in for a minute. It's been 9 years since we saw them in Rebels and when they would presumably show up in Ahsoka.
Yeah.
That's a lot of time for things to go on. We were kind of just talking about this too. When you have these big spans, you have a lot of opportunities to go and explore what has happened.
And a lot happens in 3 years in Star Wars, and we're talking about 3 times that amount of time here.
Exactly. I mean, this is like lifetimes now, right?
Sure,
So, I mean,
sure.
but this is something really cool that he would like to go back and explore. He wasn't really tipping his hand in any kind of way. He's a fairly transparent guy. He doesn't really pull a lot of punches. He just answers things pretty straight and direct. So I don't think there's any kind of subterfuge here, but you know, they'll approach him about this. And I would expect if we were going to get a novel from Timothy Zahn, I'm thinking middle of next year might be a real possibility here because I think that's an opportunity that he's interested in exploring. There's a lot of story left to tell with Thrawn. You could tell he listed a number of ideas in this interview. We'll have the link for that in the show description as well. But
Right.
you know, it was just really cool to be able to have that because he wants to be able to explore, you know, Snoke, First Order, and then of course going back to the Grisks and seeing how they work into all of this stuff. Because in his mind, the Grisks were always the big bad, right? These were always supposed to be not only Thrawn, but like Chiss, their mortal enemy. Not the Yuuzhan Vong or anyone like that, but it's always supposed to be the Grisks. And so I think for them to kind of play into that somehow would be really interesting because we've been getting that in his latest in the Ascendancy novel series, which was, you know, really done so well. But anyway, so I think that's where we might be able to see some of that. And he's definitely interested in doing it, but probably a little ways off. But one thing that was really cool for him to hear about, or for us to hear about, was that he was asked about Lars Mikkelsen's, if he was consulted as far as Rebels. And he was using the word consulting. He had to use it a bit liberally, a little bit lightly here. But when he saw the performance and bringing to life, he doesn't see a character and he doesn't hear a character when he writes them, which I always find really interesting, the creative process of what people do.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you figure you have some visualization, right, in some kind of way. But he says he doesn't. So when he saw it come to life in Rebels and what they were doing in the testing and things like that for it, he absolutely loved it. And so he was super excited for Lars Mikkelsen to be able to come and do that live because he just loves the characterization. They liked where it went because he had to capture all of the things that were most important about Thrawn were you're the smartest person in the room. And you are 5 steps ahead of everyone. And you have to have that calm demeanor and confidence about that you will always win and that you'll adapt and learn, right? So those are the things that were most important. And the way that they characterized it in the show was absolutely perfect. And so to be able to see that on live stream, or on live screen rather, gosh, we're going to get this word right eventually, was really important to him. And he's really excited for him to be able to do that.
Yeah. I mean, Lars Mikkelsen's just freaking amazing in that role. Even when Rebels came out and hearing that voice for the first time, I'm like, yeah, that's it. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I didn't have a voice in my head for him at the time, but the fact that I can't see anybody else doing it. And I was really concerned when they announced Ahsoka and they announced that there'd be possibly a Thrawn coming live action. I was thinking, oh my gosh, that's, you know, we were so used to the Rebels actor,
right,
or Rebels version of him through Mikkelsen. And
well,
for
even
me, it was
Mark Thompson modeled his off of that too. It was absolutely spot on, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, even like going back to the novelizations or the novels and, you know, the audiobooks, all of that was just so well knitted together that I was really worried that we were going to have to take a leap of faith with somebody coming in and doing it differently. So all that bodes well for the character, and there's such a massive following for Thrawn. He's just such a complex character well, there's a lot of them in Star Wars, but yeah, he's definitely up there as one of the tops. Hey, let's talk about this Acolyte thing, and maybe we can wrap up here because we've got some other stuff. But I do want to you've had this on here for a couple weeks.
Yeah,
we haven't got to it, but I think it's worth talking. I actually mentioned Well, I'll let you kick it off, and then I'll mention where I brought it up at one point, but I didn't mention the actress yet. But go on, please.
Okay, yeah. So this was back to Celebration on the live stage. Jodie Turner-Smith was hinting, about who her character was, because really didn't talk about the characters at all for the Acolyte.
Right.
And for those that maybe you can visualize, and I don't have the picture readily available, I didn't think I had this time. Jodie Turner-Smith is she's very lean, she's very tall, she's just very astute, right? And like beautifully long neck. I mean, she's just the epitome of a potential character. But what she says is that her character is, quote, a very powerful Force user, who is neither Jedi nor Sith, who leads women. And so when you think about the regalness that Jodie Turner-Smith brings to the stage and the elegance that she brings, I mean, gosh, and you think about leading women that are not Jedi or Sith, where does your mind almost immediately go?
It's the Night Sisters.
Thank you. I mean, yeah, and they would fit so perfect in this era too, with the Acolyte.
Mm-hmm.
Towards the end of the High Republic series, but still well before Phantom Menace and Clone Wars. To be able to see, and I don't know if it's a Mother Talzin specifically or not, but just to have any Night Sister and any like hard confirmation of a Night Sister, and this started to make me think about some of the trailer that we saw, because there was a Force sensitive, bad lady in there, and she didn't look like the Night Sisters that we're used to seeing of Asajj Ventress and company, but you could definitely get there with that character, whoever that character was. Maybe this was one of the Night Sisters that we're seeing on screen for the very first time.
I'm really trying. I mean, this is like the headcanon is severe for me. Like, it's real with this one. I really want her to play Mother Talzin. The timing of it all seems, I mean, we don't know how old Mother Talzin is, but just the idea that
ancient, as far as I'm concerned.
What's that?
Ancient, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. I mean, she could very well be ancient, and that's okay. But we know the Night Sisters are around during this time. And the one thing that I've struggled with the Acolyte for a very long time, since maybe even since the High Republic was announced, really, was how the Sith would come back and in what form. Because someone has to re-spark that. I mean, is everything that we know right now from the High Republic, and certainly from Phase 1 more than Phase 2, because we went back in time. We'll see how this plays out in Phase 3. But really, there is no like Sith out there. There are no Dark Force users technically out there, right? We won't get into all the historics here of it all, but somebody like a Night Sister, being the catalyst for all of this. Now, it's not to say they're dark side users, but being the catalyst for the dark side to rise again makes complete sense in my head. And I'm really struggling to detach, her from the role of Mother Talzin, because I can just see it perfectly. But the introduction of the Night Sisters to live television and getting into that, we talked about this, I think, more recently, we were talking about how it would be really wonderful to get in and learn more about the Night Sisters and how, Dark Force works and stuff like that. We know from the Clone Wars, I'm not saying there's not a lot of history there, but it's just so fascinating, and it's so different, yet the same, that I would love to see more of it in live action for the first time. So I really hope this turns out to be credible, and certainly something that's going to be true. I will say this. This is the kind of the prevailing rumor right now as far as who her character is going to be. So nothing official, and I'm not going to get into spoilers, but just simply rumors is kind of the prevailing rumor about her character. So
yeah, I love it. I love the idea of magic users, like true magic users in Star Wars, because Jedi and Sith always have this aura about them from a common person's point of view that makes it seem like magic and wizardry and everything else, where they're like, no, we're actually just, I hate to use the word manipulating the Force because the path of the open hand are embedded in my head right now, but they use the Force in a very literal, in a very intentional way, right? And they train for it. So it's not necessarily magic. It's an extension of who they are. With the Night Sisters, it feels totally different, even though it might fundamentally not be totally that dissimilar, but it sure visually feels that way and visually looks that way, right?
Right.
It does look totally different. And what we saw in the trailer with the character seeming to kind of disappear in and out of this fight, I mean, man, there's some stuff there. And I think this would just be amazing, a totally different dynamic in Star Wars that we haven't had. And you have this in-between party, right? That their allegiances aren't always, totally clear with one side or the other, or how they fit, or whether they fit, or whether they want to fit. And usually they don't. And so I think that's the really cool thing about what the Night Sisters could bring. It could bring just a totally different element and this lingering, very much like an Asajj Ventress. You never know which side she's on. She's just kind of out for, their own family, if you will, in that kind of way. So I really like that opportunity that we might have if it goes down this path. And I'm with you. I think this is And this is the way, I think this is the perfect time to be able to introduce them into Star Wars and give us a whole nother set of characters to explore in other content later on.
Yep. I'm excited. I can't wait to see this show. And certainly if they're going to bring in the Night Sisters in any capacity, whether she's planned it or not, I would really love to see that on screen for the first time. So, okay, well, I think we'll end the show there for the news. So thanks, everybody, for coming out. I know you've probably got some shout-outs that we want to give out here, but don't forget at the top of the hour, if you're a Patreon member, come back at 10 p.m. Central, where we're going to focus on Return of the Jedi 40th anniversary show.
Yeah, exactly. And thanks for Jonathan, Steph, Music Train, Lauren, Alex, Sky, Dale for joining us in the chat. If I missed anyone, my apologies. And again, if you're curious about the Patreon content or YouTube, cantinacast.com/Patreon, you can find all of the tiers with how to get to the live streams. They start at the, which one is it? This is the way tier and up, I believe. So for the video streams, so check those out. Either the recorded video or the live stream, you'll have access to that. There's a link out there right now for y'all to go click and get ready for that show as well. And then, of course, cantinacast.com/YouTube if you want to catch all of the live streams that we do on Thursdays and Sundays, any of the other videos that Lauren has for Jedi Novel Archive. She's got an amazing slate of content coming y'all's way as well. So you're not going to want to miss that. She's been killing it on the reviews front there. So certainly do please check that out.
Okay. All right. We'll end the show there.
Yeah.
Or
Thursday. Let's talk a little about Thursday, though.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
Thursday, we didn't get to this quite yet, but we're going to start our Visions coverage. So we will start with, we'll kind of do what we did last year. We'll break it into parts and group a few of these episodes together, run through them, talk about what we saw, what we think about them, and how we think this actually fits within Star Wars. And there were some really, really good ones.
Yeah, there's some really good stuff out there. So I can't wait to talk about it. It's always fun. It's just a fun conversation and really get into the heads of these folks and see the interpretations and the angles and the certain point of views that you see in Star Wars Visions as well. So, okay, well, I'm going to roll credits. I don't think I have Reader Reborn in here yet. So my apologies, but I'll get you on here very soon. So until, let's see, I'll see you guys in 11 minutes. If not, we'll see you guys this Thursday.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.